February 1969, Daytona International Speedway. Cal Rayborn is the only rider in the top 10 qualifiers on a four-stroke motorcycle. 9 spots around him belong to Yamaha and Suzuki two-strokes. The 750cc flathead KRTT he's riding was already considered obsolete by the people writing the rulebooks. By race day, it's raining. The lighter bikes seize. The faster machines crash. Rayborn rides the way he always did. Steady, precise, committed, and wins. He averages over 100 miles per hour for 200 miles on an engine design that dated to the early 1950s. Nobody standing in Victory Circle knew what that win was going to cost. 6 weeks earlier, Harley-Davidson had been sold. Harley-Davidson went into the 1960s as the only American motorcycle manufacturer still standing. Indian had closed in 1953. Every British brand, Triumph, Norton, BSA, was fighting its own war with costs and unions and the Japanese entry into their markets.
Harley was still in Milwaukee, still run by the families who built it, still producing the V-twin that had defined American motorcycling since before most of the people riding them were born. The engine in 1966 was the shovelhead. It replaced the panhead and addressed every serious criticism the panhead had drawn from mechanics and riders over the years. The rocker box design was remade. The top end breathed better. It produced more torque through the mid-range, not peak numbers on a dynamometer, but the kind of pull you could feel in your wrists at highway speed, the kind that made the bike feel planted under load and alive in the corners. The men who designed it had ridden the panhead. They knew what the engine needed because they had felt what it lacked. The Juneau Avenue plant in Milwaukee assembled engines by hand. Tolerances were not a target on a specification sheet. They were a judgment, made by men who had been doing this work for 20 and 30 years.
A flywheel assembly off by 1/1000th of an inch would not fail an inspection. It would show up later as a vibration at idle that wasn't right, a resonance at a specific RPM that told you something before you could name it, something you felt in the foot pegs before it showed up anywhere else. The knowledge of what those tolerances meant did not exist in any manual. It lived in the hands of the men on the line. On the racing side, Dick O'Brien ran the factory program with the same precision and secrecy. He was completely focused on making the KRTT competitive against machinery that was technically superior on paper. Cal Rayborn had come up through the Southern California circuit and earned a place on the factory team because nobody else on the roster could read a road course the way he could. By 1968, O'Brien's team was spending winters in wind tunnel tests at a Caltech facility, finding speed through aerodynamics that the engine alone couldn't provide.
They didn't have the most powerful machine at Daytona. They had the best prepared one, and the best man on it. The dealers who sold Harleys in the late 1960s had mostly been doing it for years, some for 2 decades or more. They knew each model's specific character and its specific weaknesses. They could tell a customer which years to look for and which to be careful about. They understood the maintenance that mattered and the maintenance that was mostly ritual. The relationship between the Milwaukee plant and the dealer network was not a marketing arrangement. It was a technical one, built over 60 years, between people who understood what they were selling and people who could sell it honestly because they understood it too. That network was about to matter more than anyone had calculated. Because the plant had a problem. Harley went public in 1965. The stock offering raised capital, but not enough. The Milwaukee facilities were aging. Investment that the company couldn't generate internally was going to have to come from somewhere else. By 1968, William H. Davidson, president since 1942, son of co-founder William A. Davidson, was looking for a partner. Bangor Punta Corporation came in at $27 a share. Davidson described the bid to shareholders as a hostile move to seize control of the company and urged them to reject it. The board agreed. AMF came in at $40 per share. Rodney C. Gott, the man running AMF, had been riding Harley since 1933. The board voted in December 1968. Davidson sent notification on November 14th. The deal was final in January 1969. 6 weeks later, Rayborn won Daytona for the 2nd year running. It was the last time a Harley-Davidson would win that race.
The man who would eventually put the company back in the hands of people who understood it had not yet been given authority over anything.
And the man who would redirect the capital that kept the engineering program alive hadn't taken over from Gott yet. The AMF name went onto the Harley gas tanks almost immediately after the deal closed. Riders noticed. Not the way people notice brand changes on consumer products, the way riders notice when something that carried meaning has been claimed by someone who doesn't understand what the meaning is. The response was the same, from Milwaukee to the California coast. In parking lots, at dealerships, at the side of the road. Wrong. This is wrong. AMF's plan was volume. In 1969, the Milwaukee operation was producing around 15,000 motorcycles a year. AMF had assessed the recreational vehicle market and concluded there was significant room to grow. The production targets they set bore no relationship to the manufacturing capacity they had acquired. Rather than invest in upgrading the Milwaukee plants, they moved final assembly to York, Pennsylvania, a former government ordnance facility that AMF already owned. It was large. It had room for expanded assembly lines. It was 700 miles from Milwaukee, where the engines would continue to be built. Assembly operations transferred over several years, and the move was complete by 1973. The arrangement was straightforward in concept. Engines out of Milwaukee, shipped to Pennsylvania, assembled into finished motorcycles. There was no established system for coordinating two plants 700 miles apart, producing halves of the same machine. They built the logistics as they went. Production climbed from 15,000 units a year to 75,000 by 1975. Quality fell in proportion. Cases weren't torqued correctly. Oil leaked. Electrical systems failed at rates that had not been seen from the Milwaukee line. Fasteners worked loose on motorcycles that were days old. The vibration that had always been the shovelhead's character became something else when the assembly tolerance was wrong. Not a trait of the design, a sign that something had not been put together correctly. Dealers received machines they couldn't sell as delivered. They were performing mechanical correction on new motorcycles before a customer ever saw them. That cost fell on the dealer. The reputation cost went to the brand. Here is what most accounts of this period have never said plainly. Rodney C. Gott, the man who bought Harley-Davidson, had been riding Harleys since 1933. He was not a corporate predator who saw a nameplate to strip. He was a genuine rider who believed AMF could bring the scale a struggling company needed to survive against Japanese competition. When the Motorcycle Museum opened at the York facility in 1977, Harley-Davidson named it after him, the Rodney C. Gott Motorcycle Museum. Voluntarily. That is not how you memorialize someone who simply came to ruin your brand. What shifted the trajectory was Gott's retirement in 1978. The leadership that followed had a different set of priorities. AMF's industrial operations needed capital, and the accounts that had been funding development work at the motorcycle division began to flow in a different direction. The engineering program that would eventually produce the engine to save the brand, still years from completion, stayed alive on what remained. Not because anyone shut it down, because the resources committed to it were being used somewhere else. William H. Davidson had already been gone for 5 years. AMF made him chairman in 1971. The documented account of what that position meant in practice is that he sat as chairman of a board that rarely, if ever, convened. He had no real authority over the company his family had built. He resigned in 1973. The president's chair went to John O'Brien, then to Gus Davis. For the first time in the company's history, the person running Harley-Davidson carried neither of the founding names. If this is the kind of story you came here for, subscribe. There are 14 more. Dick O'Brien kept the racing program alive longer than the resources warranted, but the rule changes that had made the KRTT competitive were gone, and the early XR750 that replaced it carried its own development problems. Cal Rayborn, working with a program that could no longer give him what he needed on a road course, accepted a factory Suzuki offer in late 1973. He died in New Zealand in December of that year. He was 33. By 1980, AMF had decided the motorcycle business was not worth continuing to hold. What AMF removed from Harley-Davidson was not the name or the plant. Both survived. What was taken was the accumulated understanding of how the machine was supposed to be built, the workforce that held tolerances in their hands rather than in specification sheets, and the trust of a dealer network that had spent 60 years earning the riders' confidence one transaction at a time. That trust had a specific cost when it broke. A rider who bought a new Harley in the mid-70s and found oil on the ground behind him on the way home did not become a former customer. He became a story that traveled the same roads he did. The loyalty that had made the brand resistant to everything the Japanese manufacturers brought, the commitment that kept riders in the brand through anything, turned on the product. Not on the idea of Harley-Davidson, on the object being sold under that name. The distinction kept the company alive. It barely kept the company alive. Riders built the culture anyway. They kept older machines running. They passed down what they knew through the same mechanism the Milwaukee line workers had used, through practice, through proximity, through showing someone how a correctly assembled motor felt against one that wasn't right. The community proved more durable than the management structure that spent 12 years drawing on it. In June 1981, 13 people with Harley-Davidson job titles arranged a leveraged buyout for $80 million. Von Beals had been running the company on AMF's behalf since 1975 and had spent those 6 years watching the distance between what Harley-Davidson could be and what it was being allowed to become. When the deal was done, they rode motorcycles from York to Milwaukee to market. The ride was the statement. The Evolution engine, the program that had survived the AMF years in reduced form, debuted in 1984. AMF had already walked away before it ran. Some of the knowledge that made a Milwaukee-built Harley what it was survived.
Some of it was gone before anyone went looking for it. What was the first Harley you trusted? Tell me the year and the model below.